In the wake of October 1968, one of the most memorable sports protests hit the American public, the 1968 Black Power Salute. The image depicts the winners of the 200-meter race, Tommie Smith in first, Peter Norman in second, and John Carlos in third. Protesting against racial inequality, Smith and Carlos wear black socks and no shoes, emphasizing the poverty that blacks face. Smith's scarf highlights black pride. Carlos's necklace of beads was a reminder of lynchings. Their clenched fists are accompanied by black gloves, symbolizing the Black Power movement in the late 1960s following the Civil Rights Movement.
I wasn't against the flag. I was disappointed because what the flag says is a myth, because it doesn't stand for all of its people.
The image displays a powerful moment in time when black athletes are standing up for their entire race, hoping to change the American society filled with racism and prejudice, an act of patriotism that sought to reform American society. However, instead of supporting Smith and Carlos' act of patriotism, the audience quickly became their worst enemies. The media began to label Smith and Carlos as threats, ridiculing them with misleading titles that these protests were extreme. For example, the Los Angeles Times accused Smith and Carlos of a Nazi-like salute. Time had a distorted version of the Olympic logo on its cover, but instead of the motto faster, higher, stronger, it blurred angrier, nastier, uglier. These misleading labels ultimately influenced American perception, and the vast majority of Americans saw Smith and Carlos as traitors, as villains, or at least as un-American, unpatriotic. Smith and Carlos were forced out of the Olympic Village and team. Their marriages fell apart, and Carlos experienced unemployment for many years.
I just want to get away from the reporters and so forth right now and give me some rest.
The difficulties that Smith and Carlos faced ultimately arose from a view of them as rebellious and unpatriotic, even though their protest was an act of patriotism. This begs the question, what caused the disparity between their intention and the media's misinterpretation? Upon closer reading of the image, we find that Smith and Carlos appear to be fragile and vulnerable. Their heads are bowed, Smith's eyes closed, almost as if in prayer, and together they suggest a sense of intimacy towards the audience. Compare that with Norman, the white Australian in the image who won the silver medal, who stands tall with his head up, looking straight into the distance, with a clear sense of pride. The contrast speaks for itself. This sincerity displayed by Smith and Carlos' gesture on the open stage points to a hidden concept, the idea of an inner side of individuals, an interiority, as used by Kevin Kwashi, professor in the Department of English at Brown University who teaches Black Cultural Studies, in his paper titled The Trouble with Publicness, Toward a Theory of Black Quiet. In his analysis, he uses the concept of the interior to describe the inner workings of a person, including the thoughts, feelings, desires, fears, and ambitions, a reflection of life's stimuli, such as hunger, memory, forgetting, all of which build the fundamentals of what is our humanity. In the image, Smith and Carlos are in deep thought, reflecting on the repercussions they will face after the demonstration, their families, their careers, their decision to protest despite having awareness of the politics at stake. As a result, the interior shown in the image of Smith and Carlos illustrates their fragility and the feeling of surrender in their figure, an atmosphere filled with emotions, quietness, and ultimately, a display of humanity. However, this interiority is often ignored in the media's representation of black protests. We can see this in Colin Kaepernick's protest in 2016. Instead of standing, Kaepernick knelt when a national anthem played, and many people interpreted his action as a disrespect towards the United States.
Wouldn't you love to see one of these NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, to say, get that son of a off the field right now, out, he's fired.
Again, I will never agree that it's okay to not show respect to the flag of the United States of America.
Provoked a furious response online.
I do believe you should stand for the national anthem.
And with this ruling, they at least have a choice. The ones that don't want to stand, they can stay in the locker room.
Thus, these examples ultimately illustrate ignorance of discrimination in American society by those who are predominantly white. The problem in today's society is that, when the interiority is ignored, it becomes easy for the media, or those with bias, to dismiss protests as extreme. When we ignore the humanity of an individual, their background, emotions, aspirations, everything that makes them human, we become susceptible to the biases inherent in the media, lose control of ourselves, and surrender a part of the morality within us.
I mean, ultimately, it's to bring awareness and make people, realize what's really going on in this country.
In 1968, athletes Smith and Carlos gave a message to the entire world that racism at home is accompanied by discrimination abroad. Not a lot has changed since that time, half a century later. These societal issues still remain, and one could argue they grew. That is why athletes are increasingly utilizing sports as a medium to speak out for the rights they deserve on a global scale. Kaepernick in the NFL, Smith and Carlos in the Olympics, and many more. In an age of information and digitalization, we, as the audience and recipients of sports, need to stop and think before we consume any given piece of data and distinguish the objectives from the subjectives. That is the key to making Smith and Carlos' dream come true.